Hey everybody, and welcome back to the LoveCrafts Show. I'm Mr. X-Stitch.
And I'm Merion.
And we're here to talk about love, craft, and everything in between.
And today we're extremely excited because this is our first chance to have a guest on the show. And we have the fabulous Debbie Bliss.
Thank you.
Hello, Debbie.
Thank you. And I'm very excited to be on the show as well.
We're very excited.
We are very excited.
Wow.
Jamie and I were talking about you and talking about your designs and everything you've done. But as a cross-stitcher, you probably might not have ever come across the Debbie Bliss knitting pattern if you're, not a knitter.
I've seen them in a lot of sections of craft shops I don't pay any attention to.
Yeah,
for
to be
sure.
fair, I think there's probably knitters as well that don't know of me or heard about me either. So
It's fair to say that you're kind of a living legend, though, right?
oh dear.
Delia Smith.
Yeah, no, we
She's
can
the
say that.
Delia
It's not
Smith.
fair if we say
She
that.
is the Delia Smith of
do.
knitting.
Yeah,
She is.
that's true.
Thank you.
I understand.
I'm not. I love a compliment. I'm not going to turn that down. I mean, I don't think it's true, but I'm gonna take that. Thank you very much, both of you.
Yeah.
Because you've been a designer for, 30 years?
Like 40.
40 years.
Yeah.
40 years.
So because this was a curious thing when I first realised that, I was interested in the perspective you get in that time, and the trends you see coming and going and all of these things. Where you must have seen the same people, different people have the same idea quite a few times.
To be honest, it's really hard to be original. I mean, it was a lot easier when I first started out because children's wear then was pretty dreadful. So actually it was a lot easier to be more interesting because the colour palettes that children were dressed in were pretty awful. They were sort of like really sickly, pastels. And anything that was actually very strongly coloured, or it might be a navy and things like that, was considered a bit, I think it was considered a bit continental. And so, yeah.
But isn't it interesting? Because I remember going to wool shops with my grandma as a little girl, and there was only sort of bright yellow and bright red, navy or brown, possibly orange, but and all acrylic. Yeah. So you sort of go back to the 60s, and that's what people were knitting. And then so by the time decades later you blossom along and then you've got your own yarn designs. The 80s must have been really fun in terms of sort of crazy picture knits and stuff. When did you start? What began?
I started off knitting plants because I was on a really, it was a fashion and textile course, but it was very fine art orientated, which basically meant when I left, I'd done things like made hats out of crisp packets, and I remember doing a cardboard coat, but then was basically unemployable for about 5 years after that. Oh no, sorry, it was 10 years after that. So that's how I started. And then magazines, I had a little bit of publicity. I did some knitted insects and flowers for a company. Then I remember I was on Pebble Mill at one, and then some magazines were interested. So apart from a bit of a foray into ready-to-wear when I did some work for Baby Gap, it's always been designing for knitters rather than, as I say, ready-to-wear when people would buy your garment. So that comes with a different kind of approach anyway. And actually, it was lucky. I was lucky. So at the end of the 70s and the 80s, the kind of designs that were popular were basically 2 rectangles and 2 squares. The kind of knits I like to wear, I used to knit myself out of the old Oddham's books, the ones that had the sort of like grey-brown cover, and they were knits from the 30s and the 40s. And because they were tailored, it introduced me to a way of shaping, which I've always been really interested in, like tailored knits or how to do different sleeve heads. But because I was still learning how to compile patterns, because that's what's quite difficult. Like people who might do hand knitting at college now, when they leave, it's still really difficult to be commercial in order to grade your patterns for people to knit from. It meant that I was able to kind of train myself to do that through knitting up these old patterns from the 30s and 40s. But then the kind of designs I was presenting to magazines were very simple, which made it was brilliant because it meant that I could actually then learn my craft, if you like, and the technical things through selling designs that were very simple. And because, grading and things, it's scary.
I mean, pattern writers.
Yeah.
It's a very, very tricky business.
Terrifying.
To get the proportions of different body sizes right.
Right.
It's a really tricky business. So then, fast forward I first sort of came across your patterns when I had my children. I think a lot of people do this because they look for baby knits.
Right.
And baby patterns and things where they come back to knitting. So they might have knitted as a child and then they forget about it. And then they pick it up again as soon as they've got a bit of time, which is ironically when you have a baby, well, you've really got no time, but then you find a bit of time. You think, I would like to make something. Then comes along your very successful range of baby knits. But why baby knits? Because you've got lots of baby books.
Actually, I always think that, I think I've been incredibly lucky. I really have, because I was in the right place at the right time at that point in my career. And up until then, I've been doing the odd thing for magazines, and actually that hadn't gone terribly well, I have to say. And then I was working as a PR, and the wonderful Angela Kennedy, who was fashion editor of Good Housekeeping then, asked me if I would edit a book, choose designers and work with them. So I collaborated on that, and that introduced me to publishers. And then at the time I was pregnant with Will, who's now 34, and that made me think about the kind of things I wanted to dress him in, because I wanted to dress him in really stylish things. So first of all, I designed things that I thought he looked pretty good in, but also realised that I couldn't get over his head. So they were, Merion, I think you'll probably understand how awkward that can be when their ears seem to get bigger and bigger. So then what that made me do is to realise how you have to combine, when you're designing for babies and children, something, you want to put your kids in nice designs, don't you? But they've got to be practical as well. So that was a good training too. So it was through doing the baby knits that then publishers and then magazines were asking me to also design fashion knitwear as well.
Which must have been a hoot in the 80s. For fashion knits.
2 rectangles and 2 squares. I was laughing.
So I was thinking, and I'm sort of thinking of all your different collections. There is a collection I think Jamie would really love because it has a lot of embroidery on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were inspired by the sort of Russian, Eastern European textiles, that sort of lovely folk embroidery.
Kind of smocking direction.
Yeah, on the bonnets and the sweaters, and so pretty.
I think there's a lovely history of embroidery on knitting, because one of the things, when I was looking at the old books from the 30s and 40s, some of those had, you had sort of like texture bobbles and things, and then say within the diamond there might be embroidery, and I always loved them. And I always remember my first day at school, which would have been in 1957, there was a girl called Mylene that was wearing one sitting opposite me.
Oh, Mylene.
They were called Tyrolean cardigans. Okay. And then my sister-in-law is Hungarian, actually Hungarian Roma, and I've looked at her mother, the kind of embroidery she did, and always been fascinated by that as well. So, I think it's lovely. There's something too about when crafts cross over that I think is really interesting as well.
Yeah.
Have you, Jamie, have you embroidered and cross-stitched onto things that you wear?
Not intentionally. And a few times I've been stitching on the train, accidentally sewing the trousers.
Sewn into my jeans.
That sort of thing. Yeah. I did have a bit of a habit of that slightly. Or this is stitching on a train, and sometimes if you're stitching on a train, you have to be like, hey, make a bit of an extra effort. I'm a guy stitching on a train. It's a bit weird. What I would do if I was changing threads, I'd stick the needle into my jeans, because it just goes there. The jeans fabric's thick enough. But at the same time, I'd be as I've stuck it into my leg, because that's how tough I am. But I've not done much measuring. I mean, there is a natural grid, isn't there, that occurs with knitting, and I've seen a few people kind of explore those kind of areas.
I remember the first thing I did at infant school in the craft class, and it was. Do you remember we used to do things like that? There were squares, but with the holes in.
Binker. That's what it's called.
Yeah, plastic squares.
Binker.
Yeah.
Oh, I was
then
thinking
it was
of the fabric.
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
And I remember embroidering this whole thing, and then going up to the teacher and presenting it to her. My dress came up at the same time. And exactly like you, had sewn the whole thing to my dress. And I remember all those years later, the humiliation.
Still,
she wasn't happy.
To this day.
No, she wasn't happy.
Oh, I had a terrible humiliation at school when I couldn't cut a piece of sugar paper in a straight line.
That was tricky. I can remember that.
Very hard. Yeah. And the teacher, I mean, this just shows you how not politically correct things were. But there was a girl in my class called Heather who was partially sighted. And the teacher actually said to me, Merion, Heather can cut that better than you, and she's partially sighted.
Oh.
And I thought that was absolutely dreadful. And poor Heather. Anyway,
Turned out she could.
Yeah, she could. I mean, she was a much better cutter.
But I was never. People expect me, because of the knitting and the craft background, that I'm good at other craft things, but I still can't wrap parcels properly at Christmas. And the other thing that you used to have to do back in the 50s was always cover your exercise book with wallpaper. And I was pretty rubbish at that as well.
Yeah.
It was a bit of, glue,
I remember doing that as well.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, kind of. I remember covering your books and stuff.
Yeah.
For a little while when I started Mr. X-Stitch, I also started another little blog that was called Regret a Sweater, which I just thought was quite a funny play in words, but it was almost going to be for like bad sweaters and stuff. But what happened pretty much was I just found the images from Giles Brandreth's knitting books and pretty much put those up and then left it at that. But weirdly, that was a bit of a slightly transformative period, wasn't it? Or was there was a sudden like, hey, look at my crazy jumper?
Yeah, there was when I first started talking about the really plain knits, but there was the picture sweater thing, particularly for children. So I think the first designs I sold to magazines were little pictures, with trains on or landscapes and then there was a big thing for landscape sweaters, which actually has come round again now because I designed one in the kind of sort of Iceland collection that I did. So what you were saying earlier about, you've been around so long that things come round again. Yeah. But also that works in another way too, because I can remember times when I was really, really worried about the fact I was meeting people whose mothers didn't knit, but their grandmothers knitted. And so you thought, well, we've lost a generation. And so how is this going to carry on? But then you realise that actually young people were knitting, and the whole thing about clubs and meeting in bars and coffee shops and things like that to knit, and the whole thing about knitting groups, there's been a massive revival. And probably it will dip again in the future. But now I've realised that, it'll either come back again or, it's never going to go away.
And I think it's very true of embroidery and cross stitch as well. I think that's having an enormous resurgence in popularity.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one because I started out in 2008 and thought I could see on the horizon there were some groovy craft things happening over in the States and stuff. There was a documentary called Handmade Revolution or something like that. And you think that these things are going to come along quite quickly, but what I've learned over time, I think, is people find their own way to it. So these crafts always exist, and they're unlikely, particularly the textile ones, to ever evaporate completely. You just have to find these points of entry for people that are acceptable to them. So I feel like even now, like macrame is quite a groovy way of getting into it. That was a horror for quite a long time. But any of these, or in my context, like subversive cross stitch, sweary cross stitch, for some people it's like that's okay to do that, and so then they'll have a go at cross stitch, and then maybe they'll move on to other things as a consequence. So it's trying to find those ways in for people, which is where I think you get these ebbs and flows. They kind of tie in with like commercial aspects and stuff.
I think it's like most things, isn't it? There's so many other things that are that add towards it. Like, for instance, I think the fact that the younger generation is so much interested in like cause and effect, about the fact of where are things made, the whole global thing about provenance and things like that. And that is one of the things, if you make it yourself, exactly the provenance. There's been so much about, the generation that buys things and then throws it away. But actually it's also the same generation that cares about making things and cares about and will spend money on something because they understand the difference between perhaps using very cheap materials that won't last, or using materials that might be a bit more expensive but have a longevity. So I think there's that too. But also I think we also have to accept it became really trendy as well. It's like I'd meet people, a long time ago, actually perhaps not that long, they'd be embarrassed to knit in front of people because it was seen as being really dated, a bit old-fashioned, only old women did it. So it, the fact that suddenly you got models knitting between shows, or you got celebrities knitting, suddenly people are going, well, actually, it's quite cool. So there is that, although you could argue that's quite a shallow reason for doing it, brings people in, and that's, people are proud to be seen crafting now, which I think to me, that's really exciting, because even, in all the years I've been doing it, I think I truly feel that now it's the most exciting time. So here at LoveCrafts, people that work here, they'll sit and knit on the sofa in their, in their lunch hour. And just talking to today, like Harriet and Ella that work on the private label team, they're young designers and they're designing all day, but then they're still getting all excited, ordering yarn and making things for themselves. I just find that, I sit there going, and actually that enthuses me again, because the reality of it is when it's your job and when that's what you're doing all the time, you can get a bit jaded, or with me, a bit panicky, and like, how can I do anything that's fresh again, and so you do get imposter syndrome. I get it all the time. But then sitting next to Ella and Harriet, I'm thinking, oh yeah, and I can feel that, getting that myself. So it's a great time to be around in the craft area. It really is.
I think it is very exciting to be in the craft business. But I just want to spotlight a little bit of that for a minute. We're into February now, but we're coming up to the beginning of March, International Women's Day, which is Sunday the 8th of March. And we were sort of thinking about inspirational women in the craft world, somebody that has really inspired you, or somebody that, in the past has inspired you to do something, or somebody now. Have you got an inspirational craftswoman, Jamie?
Yeah. The first person that springs to mind for me is someone who's a friend of mine. She's called Sarah Corbett, and she founded the Craftivist Collective. So she would have founded that probably about 2010, something like that. And I've done a number of craftivism projects with her. So craftivism being craft and activism, and just using the power of craft for like political means, but in a sort of gentle activism kind of way. She calls it slow activism. So I've done projects with her that have ended up with us going to Indonesia. We did a project with Save the Children, and we invited people to make jigsaw pieces that had solutions on them, and they all kind of sent them in, and we had a big sort of display of those pieces. But it was also something where we got to connect with people and learn. And Sarah does lots of different work in that kind of way, and she encourages people to spend a lot of time, making things that have a political with a small p statement, but the process of making the things means they sit inside that space and they think about the issues that arise. And I know that like you've had a couple at least of kind of craftivism projects with Knit for Peace and their blanket for Calais as well.
Yes, so when the jungle was still around in Calais, I got involved in what we would do. We'd raise money for we'd buy old caravanners that needed doing up. This was part of Jungle Canopy, a charity. And so then we would do them up and then furnish them and then take them over to Calais, because there are obviously the unaccompanied children, the vulnerable people, that to be in a caravan where you could lock it was incredibly important. But then one of the things that we always put in the caravan was... so local people would sit and knit in the pub, knit squares, and then somebody that perhaps couldn't knit that wanted to be involved would sew them all together. Then we would put that blanket in the caravan with a little note from us to the person that was going to be living in the caravan. So generally, what I think is wonderful, and I'm so proud to be part of it, is people like Dame Hilary Bloom at Knit for Peace. She's been amazing. When I went over to Calais again year before last, and they sent over loads of blankets, but also woolly hugs. They're also incredible for the work that they do, providing blankets for people who may have lost somebody or have a ill child or ill. And actually, last year when I was ill, and I remember lying in bed and thinking, I've got to get up and I'd really like a blanket. And I had this really odd feeling that I was going to get up and find one, and I did. I got up, and in a bag was a blanket from Woolly Hugs, which was amazing. Which is still a great comfort to me. And also I've met wonderful people, or wonderful women who are involved in creating knitting circles for refugee women, people waiting for asylum for their leave to remain, and that whole thing now about mindfulness. I think that's so important then for women who may not have knitted before, but the rhythm of knitting, being with other women in a group, and just the knowledge that there are people there that want to help them too, I think is really encouraging for them. So, yeah, there's a massive part of the crafting community that I think knitters generally have empathy.
There are so many shows about crafts, but there's only one show about LoveCrafts.
Perfect.
It's like having your friends round for a cup of tea and a bit of stitching, only we're on a laptop.
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it's like.
And you don't know us. It's like having acquaintance. we will be your friends. Let us show you why we love craft.
Crafts. So Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is coming up. Jamie, come on. Are you a Valentine's Day guy or not?
I'm like a slow romantic. Like every day is an opportunity for romance, and by that I mean the romance of doing the washing up without bitching about it that time. Or I'm like, if
Why would you bitch about it anyway?
Well, it seems relentless in my house, but that's a whole nother. No, or just quiet romance of cups of tea in the morning, or I don't know, knowing that my wife's coming home, so I'll put some toast on and throw it at her when she gets in the door. It's the same with Christmas, and like that time you called me a Grinch about Christmas, because I don't.
It's not letting that go.
He was a Grinch. He was a Grinch.
I don't like the over marketing of this stuff is the problem. So it's like Christmas is about peace on earth and goodwill to all men.
Yeah.
Valentine's Day is about love, but it's not about a dozen red roses and an inflatable balloon because I forgot and I've treated you like an every day.
All day.
Yeah.
Well, let's just look at
Yeah.
the origins of Valentine's Day before we sort of step past it. So, according to my research, it's really not very nice. So Valentine was a 3rd century priest in Rome, and he was marrying soldiers. I mean, he wasn't marrying them himself. He was the priest that was performing the ceremonies to marry them. I mean, he might have wanted to marry them, who knows. But Claudius II said, hang on a minute, I want my soldiers single, because they're better at fighting, and they haven't got wives and children to come home to. So he banned marriages for young men. So Valentine said, I don't like this. And he started marrying these soldiers to their sweethearts in private, in secret. And of course, Claudius then found out and said, right, in the slammer for you.
Kicked off.
Popped him into prison. And I think, and after that he was killed. But so he then was later on, he was canonised for St. Valentine because he was the sort of patron saint of recognising the importance of love, I suppose.
He would have just got an MBE these days. He wouldn't have got canonised. That's a big...
Yeah, absolutely. Or a CBE. Probably.
Maybe, for services to love.
But and so, but there are other stories. So it does sort of... they'd say he fell in love with the jailer's daughter, and then he sent her a letter that said, from my Valentine. I think that's a bit of a big ask, because he was a priest.
What was his first name?
Valentine.
What was his surname?
Valentine.
Wow. Valentine.
His name was
St.
Valentine. St. Valentine the priest.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway.
It's a very prophetic name.
Anyway, so I want to know what you think of this sort of, it's not that modern, it's been going a while now, the trend for galantines and palantines. Yes. So instead of sort of sending Valentine's cards to somebody that you're romantically interested in or has broken your heart, you bastard, say, for example, you go back a day to the 13th, which is Galentine's, and then you send cards and stuff or celebrate your girlfriends, or your boyfriends in terms of your palantines. Yeah. So it's a sort of a platonic version of Valentine's without the
Why don't we just
trauma.
get rid of all 3 of them? I didn't even know about Galentine's until you told me, Merion.
Did you not?
No, I don't get out much, to be honest. And I agree with Mr. X, that whole thing about it just being one day. And also because when I was a teenager and didn't have a boyfriend, I sent Valentines to myself so that I could look like I'd got a boyfriend.
Do you know what? My sister sent me a Valentine's card. Pretending to be a bloke she worked with. Oh, no. Because she felt sorry for me, I think.
Oh, that's good then, isn't it?
And it was, I was so thrilled at the time. But then when I found out, it was just years later. Years later. Yeah.
Such is my love that I'll buy myself a box of chocolates every week and pretty much smash my way through those of an evening.
But also, your story of love is not about a boyfriend. Your story of love is about your sister doing that for you.
Well, yes,
Oh my
bless
God,
her
I'm
heart.
quite moved by that myself.
That's
It's
good.
actually welling up here.
I personally, I think it's very lovely that people, if you want to sort of recognise your Galentines, for me, my girlfriends are sacred. They're the most beautiful things that I have. So I love, my children, obviously I love my children, that they're also
Are they
very
listening
sacred.
in? Is that why you just
no. I mean, I just, and my husband, obviously, I love them all.
Oh my God.
But your girlfriends are very sort of sacred to you because they've often known you through all sorts of terrible traumas or good things, good and bad.
I have this weird situation, right? I'm like a lone wolf in as much as I was an only child living in a village in the middle of nowhere and always I was one of those kids at school where I was like friends with everybody, but I didn't have any cliques.
Yeah.
And so I've always been kind of like that. Whereas my wife has got a core group of 4 friends who they've known each other since they were 4.
Oh.
And I stare bewilderedly at that. And at the moment, 3 of them are in different parts of the world, but they still meet up and get together and stuff. So I understand where you're coming from. But for me, this is all like an abstract concept.
I mean, now, have you got sort of friends that you would sort of, phone up if you had a bit of amazing news or a bit of terrible news? Or would it be your wife would be your first?
First, the dog.
The dog.
The keeper of all my secrets. Then my wife is my best friend. I think, I mean, it's weird for me, but I recognise what you're saying. I think if you've got good friends, sometimes, I mean, if like a Galentine's or a Palentine's or a Thementine's or a Doggentine's or whatever, if it inspires you to go and show some love to people overtly in a way that you don't normally do, then so be it. But I feel like you should bake your friends a cake on any given Wednesday, really.
Absolutely.
I had the most amazing experience last year when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And the reason why I just want to say that isn't that I particularly feel the need to always talk about breast cancer, but is that it wasn't, I mean, that your family and close friends are going to be incredibly supportive. Oh my God, the community. There were so many things like the lady that worked in our local shop. She's Italian. I'd probably just gone up to the till a couple of times, and her mother was over and from Sardinia and had made me a homemade lasagna. Then I got a homemade tiramisu. Then somebody left homemade soup on my doorstep.
Oh, I
had
love
cards
that.
from people that barely knew me just to say, I know you don't really know me, but I just heard, and just this is my phone number. And then because I couldn't go on holiday, a group started up at Deb Can't Go on Holiday. So what happened was I had a Greek day. We had Greek music and Greek food. And then my friend who's German, I had a German day that was called, what was it? The Debbie... I don't know, beer Keller day. I haven't quite got that right, by the way. And where they had beer and cooked German food. I had an Italian day. I've had a French day. And I've had a Guyanese day. I mean, this is like, it is quite amazing that these people have done that. And as I say, it was just, I found, it was a bit like going to your own funeral, but being there, which, by the way, I can recommend. It's brilliant because we've all been to funerals when people have said, oh, it's a shame that Reg isn't here. If you only knew how lovely people are and things like that. And I had that. So that kind of thing about friendship, as I say, in the last 12 months has been amazing, but so unexpected.
Do you know the interesting thing, and this ties up a couple of our conversations quite nicely, but it's the same with the craftivism thing. People will express love if the opportunity presents itself.
Yeah,
I learned this from my experiences. If you say to people, I want you to make a thing in a good cause because you're going to show love to people in a different country who may need it or something like that, people will do it.
Yeah.
People express their love to you because they had a mandate all of a sudden, whereas otherwise, and particularly with Britishness, you're just like, you're not going to go, hey, you over there, I love you, because we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
But given an opportunity, the humanity and the goodness in all of us shines through.
That's a really good point, actually.
It's a
that
lovely
people
point.
perhaps feel that they're being over emotional or don't feel that they want to be too, all over you or clingy, all those things. That's a really good point. That it does give you a mandate that if you feel there's a reason that you can do that and show that friendship and sense of community and love, that gives us an excuse to do it.
And it's so rewarding. It makes you feel really like I did a project couple of years ago with the National Trust, and we covered a Christmas tree in cross-stitched baubles, and I had over 900 of them from around the world. And to see this tree filled with all this like handmade love made me really emotional, because you're just like, God, people are all right.
Yes.
You know,
Isn't
the
it?
news will tell us that people are assholes, quite frankly, but given the chance, we're all right.
Yeah.
It's really nice to know. So Galentine, I mean, 24/7, 365 Galentine, but at least 13th of February, get your cupcakes.
It seems forced, doesn't it, this whole thing about having a special day? The only one I really like is Mother's Day. I still like that.
I think the thing is, it's quite a nice opportunity. Like you say, it's a mandate to do something. If you don't see someone all the time and you want to sort of show them a bit of love or whatever, then you can do your Galentine's things, or you could just go out for dinner, or you can, as long as it's not, you know, like you say, gets too commercial. But we would love to know what you think of Valentines and Palentines and Galentines. And so leave us a comment, tell us what you think about it, or whether you love it or you hate it, or you're going to make something for your best Galentine.
I want to know as well, like, would need to get a box of tissues when the time's. I want to know about the romantic gestures you've either given or received. Not because I'm desperate for ideas for the future. Maybe.
Or in fact, if, like me, your sister arranged a fake Valentine for you, we want to know about that too. So we want sad stories.
The unrequited love for a person that never existed in the first place.
People had to write their own Valentine
and
cards
people
when
had
they
to
were
write
14.
when they were 14. Well, 14's a tricky age for Valentines. But I mean, I think we could say then, I mean, you could sort of knit a heart or cross stitch a heart or do something, you know, little. Last Valentine's Day, I have to tell you, in the LoveCrafts office, I crocheted about 58 tiny little red
58.
hearts. I can't remember how many people were here then, but I did.
Is it about 58?
It was about 58. Just throw a number out there. And I sneakily put them on everybody's desk. Just show them how much I love them.
Did really get one, Merion?
I don't. Yeah, you would have done, but
Okay,
obviously it didn't mean anything to you because you've clearly forgotten. But it could be that you were off being ill.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It could be that, it could be that.
That's
but
very
we also
sweet.
have a really nice thing where we have this box on the table where you can go and put a note in. And I can't remember what it is. It must be like a sort of Valentine's-y thing, but it's got a name and I can't remember it. And we'll put down what we called it in the notes after the show.
Yeah.
But we all had this opportunity to put notes in to sort of say something nice about somebody and pop the note in the box. Well, I was like a woman possessed. I couldn't stop. I was stuffing paper in this box like no tomorrow. And so it's a lovely opportunity to tell somebody how much you care. I love that. Let's sort of celebrate February with all our sort of positive messages of love.
Yeah.
So whether you're going to stitch it or you're going to sew it or you're going to knit it, you're going to crochet it, or you're going to exit. No, don't exit. Don't exit. That's hilarious. Don't exit.
Stay.
Stay.
That was.
I love that.
I've got some random questions.
Go.
Yeah. Oh, they're the worrying ones.
No, not really. No, there's only a couple.
Fine.
When was the heyday of knitting, do you think? Maybe we've already talked about it and you said it's now.
Yeah,
but
actually,
just
I
wonder-
would say now.
Would you?
I would definitely say now, yeah.
Okay.
Because I just get, when I first went out to America, it was when I was doing workshops there, and I was absolutely terrified of, going into shops and doing, presentations or doing workshops there. But I found that generally people are incredibly friendly anyway in America. But what I came back so excited about, so we were talking about, perhaps 1999, something like that, when the yarn first came out. And but what really excited me was seeing people at stores that had tables that you'd sit around. And this sounds mad now because, of course, that happens all the time, that most knitting shops, or wool shops, I should say, will have a place where people come in and women come in, generally women come in and sit around a table and knit or look through patterns But that was really revolutionary then. Whereas a lot of the wool shops were pretty unwelcoming places. You'd go in and sort of like get your, like 90% acrylic yarn, because most of it was, the blends were pretty awful. And then you'd go up to somebody that might be a bit brusque. shall we say?
Oh yes, I think.
Do you remember the brusque
I do.
retailers?
The trauma of actually. I think it
fear.
actually goes all the way across haberdashery. I think in the past, if you had to ask a question about any kind of haberdashery, you were considered to be a vagrant.
I've got another question.
Go.
Is that right? I want to know what the last good thing that you thinged was. So, to put this in context...
This is a Jamie special, right?
It's what I like. The last good cheesecake that I made was a Nigella Lawson one it was like a Nutella cheesecake thing that was super decadent. And in fact, my daughter ate enough of it that she threw up, which is a lesson there about children and chocolate cake. But what was the last good thing that you thinged?
When you say thing, does that mean like made or saw?
Anything that you literally.
Anything, yeah.
Merion knows exactly what I'm going to say here because I bored her with it. So my son, who's an actor, was on Casualty.
Wow.
And when he cycled into that hippie camp, I just thought his cycling was just brilliant. I thought I taught him that. I'm the one that said, take off the stabilisers, you can do this.
How old is your son?
34.
Oh, good. How long has he had the stabilisers off for?
About a couple of years.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I can tell you too, you'll be very interested in this, that underneath his sort of pull-on like bobbly hat thing, his hippie hat, he had to wear a helmet for safety, health and safety on a set. Yeah, that's why his head looks a bit big in the shots.
If any of you haven't caught up with that marvellous programme, it is
Casualty,
which is a British hospital drama.
Yes.
Is he IMDb-able, your son?
I think he might be.
Yeah.
He was also in another hospital driver some years ago, and he died horribly. And I sat on the sofa and I absolutely sobbed. And this voice next to me went, "Mum, I'm actually sitting next to you." It was such a great performance.
Well, at least you've gone through that trauma now. Weirdly, so the next time he dies, you'll be like, "That's fine."
So if anything does happen, I go, "Yeah, I've done that, been there."
So, Debs, tell us what is coming up for you now. I know you've got a really exciting collection coming this month.
Yeah.
Designed especially for tweens.
Tweens, yes.
Now tell us about that.
Oh, so I always think that there's that period between being, like young kids and it's and what you would design for them, but then also there's an older group. So I think when you get into the proper teens, then you're just going to go to, I don't know, H&M or something like that and buy your stuff. But there's something when you're kind of in betweeners. So I designed a collection which was specifically for them. So there's a baseball jacket that's got like a leopard print on it. There's for those of you who are watching this rather than
there's a lovely chevron sweater
I went through a
here.
period of getting quite obsessed by chevrons. I did an Olympic collection too, where I use chevrons a lot there because of there's a sort of sporty motif, and using colour in a lot of them too, but also still being quite pared down, apart from the leopard skin like baseball style jacket, because I also think it's quite a self-conscious age and you don't want something that goes woof. You're still in that kind of hoodie stage as well.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that you get the sort of the children who are very happy to be children for a long time. But there are always children who want to be grown up right from the off.
Yeah.
And it's very hard sometimes to find knitting patterns for those children, or any kind of patterns actually. And this is lovely because they're not too grown up.
Yeah.
They're not too sort of babyish. They're kind of, they've got funky things. There's that one of those, the cardigans with a sort of contrast zip on one side, which looks fantastic. And the chevrons, and then the sort of leopard print baseball jacket.
Yeah,
isn't
and
it?
there's one with the different coloured sleeves and different, back and front. So I think too, when I'm doing collection, it's always like 5 designs each time, and you want to also have a range of technical ability too. You don't want to think that you're just doing things that are over-complicated or over-designed. So there'll also be in 1 or 2 of those 5s, there will be something that, technically is quite easy or quite basic knit. Some people might know because I bore them to tears about it. Eid, who lives with us, who's a young Syrian refugee, he is hoping to be in the refugee swim team. And when he first came to this country 2 years ago, he didn't know how to swim at all. So he is an amazingly inspirational person. And he's also modelling 2 of the sweaters in the collection.
I might say, actually, he's modelling them very beautifully. He is a very handsome.
He's got that
very handsome.
He's got that blue
swimmer.
steel look.
He has got this. He has.
I thought I had that. It turns out I've got grey aluminium. Close, but very no cigar.
I bet you could turn on that blue steel. I know you can.
In a previous life with a different face. Thanks, Debbie.
Well,
it's been really interesting getting to know you and stuff. I've enjoyed the banter. There's so much banter that you won't see on this video. It's been hilarious. That sounds sarcastic, but it has actually been quite fun.
It has been great fun,
as
it always is with Debbie.
No, that's cool.
Bliss Bants.
So thanks to everybody for listening. This has been the LoveCrafts Show, where we have talked about love, craft, and everything in between. Don't forget to like, to subscribe, and come back next month for more of the same. In the meantime, I'm Mr. X-Ditch.
And I'm Merino.
And I just called to say I love craft to you, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart.
He's
my
so
favourite
smooth.
songs.
I love it. Well done.
Thanks.
I just called to say I love you. I just called to say
Is that one of your favourite songs?
care.
That'd be quite good. If you like LoveCrafts, you're going to love our show. So just subscribe now. Get it over and done with.
I love it.
It's the LoveCrafts Show. It's the LoveCrafts Show. Oh my God, we love to craft. It's the LoveCrafts Show.
There you go. There it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
We haven't even started on the proper singing yet, have we?